Distinguished delegates, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it's with great pleasure that I'm welcoming you to this event on the sustainable production and fair trade of green hydrogen. My name is Dagmar Prün, I'm the president of Bread for the World. The message from various reports, such as the IPCC's mitigation of climate change, the UNEP's emission gaps report, or the World Energy Outlook of the International Energy Agency is crystal clear. A transformative approach to energy lies at the heart of the Paris Agreement on climate change, as well as of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The solution to stay within the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit and the solution to the current energy crisis will come from renewables and just energy transition. Clean energy can reduce emissions, strengthens resilience, and produce tremendous development benefits, from innovation to new jobs, from poverty reduction to empowered women. Russia's war on Ukraine painfully demonstrates the urgency to plan a future without fossil fuels. In this context, green hydrogen produced by renewable energy emerges as a likely promising solution for some sectors which cannot be decarbonized by the direct use of renewable electricity. The momentum about green hydrogen is enormous, and governments from the global north and the global south start developing strategies and plans to shape a hydrogen economy. The private sector is also actively involved in this process. This is welcome, but not sufficient. Also, green hydrogen is amongst the priorities of different governments, such as Namibia, South Africa, or Chile. There are also risks for local communities and the exporting countries located in the global south. The emerging green hydrogen market must consider the interest and the rights of all involved and avoid the continuation of an extractive economic model based on the over-exploitation of natural resources. Ladies and gentlemen, we, Bread for the World and the Heinrich Böll Foundation, have spent substantial time engaging with civil society organizations and other key stakeholders in potential exporting nations of the global south in a bottom-up process of consultations. These dialogues confirm the high expectation placed on green hydrogen. At the same time, participations also foresee numerous and diverse challenges for people. Therefore, we would like to present in this meeting the recommendations from our partner organizations on how to ensure a sustainable hydrogen production and trade that contributes to a fair and just energy transition and energy security, while helping to mitigate climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for participation in this event. Together, let us continue our work to make a just energy transition a reality. I wish us all the best for a productive event, and I'm looking forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prün, for that. My name is Lauren Jimenez, a Sustainable Development Practitioner, Director of How We Adapt, and the lead for the Just Urban Transitions Project in South Africa. I will be moderating this rich discussion this afternoon. I work to support Heinrich Böll's research and engagement process in South Africa, plugged into this international consultation process to inform a suite of green hydrogen policy options to support more just outcomes across the global south. This international process focused primarily on how green hydrogen will land at specific sites with specific impacts on specific communities at those sites, all along the green hydrogen value chain. It covered 7 countries: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Morocco, South Africa, and Tunisia. acknowledging the diversity of interests and impacts shaping those local contexts, thus allowing for slightly different methods to be applied in each country. A broad set of stakeholders were indeed consulted, including affected and potentially affected communities, social and environmental NGOs, trade unions, climate and energy experts, think tanks, and government officials, capturing all these results in a single country outcomes document, which was then synthesized into the Global Synthesis Report, available for everyone to read. This locally oriented international inquiry and consultation delivers a level of granularity and bottom-up view that is missing from many green hydrogen policy development processes. The scale of inquiry is certainly not often the focus of the bilateral and multilateral decarbonization-driven exchanges between North and South for the development of green hydrogen. International and national policies and standards can look very coherent and ambitious at these national and international levels, and the language of the jet, being far-reaching, seems ever expanding and indeed picked up across the private sector, across private energy companies and extractive companies to motivate their investment plans into the future. However, understanding the ground level for green industrialization, we have a view of the complex and contested initial conditions, the reality from which we begin this transition in practical terms. And this reality shows that enforcing social and environmental regulations and upholding standards is indeed very difficult, and that justice is elusive. There is a profound disconnect between just transition and preceding sustainable development policy ambitions on the one hand and implementation on the other, raising loud and urgent questions regarding the conditions for justice. For example, the presence of multi-level state capabilities, aligned political economic interests, and the baseline realization of the rights of affected communities that can be addressed here at this point where the green hydrogen economy is still nascent. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Dinga Sikwebu. Mr. Sikwebu worked for 25 years as the head of education for the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA. He has been involved in the formulation of trade union policies on energy and climate change over the course of his career. And he is a just transition mentor for trade unionists, teaching also on at the Global Labour University, based at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. Over to you.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to all the panelists and participants. As you said, I am based in South Africa, and South Africa is one of the countries in the global south that has a green hydrogen roadmap. And this green hydrogen roadmap was adopted by our cabinet and unveiled in February this year. I have participated in the last few months in a network established by the Heinrich Bull Foundation, the South Africa office, on the developments in our country on green hydrogen. I have participated in the hubs, organized workshops or participated in workshops in 4 of the hubs that have been identified in the green hydrogen roadmap for South Africa. I've also been involved in online discussions with a network that HBS constituted, and that is made up of mainly climate justice movements. While the idea of this network was to focus on the question of how the green hydrogen economy will develop in South Africa and globally, what emerged in the course of our discussions is that the participants in the workshops, firstly, heard from our workshops about the green hydrogen roadmap for South Africa for the first time. And this was quite striking, because while our government was interacting internationally and globally, the people who are at the coalface of these developments had little knowledge about what was planned, and more importantly, that in the formulation of the green hydrogen roadmap for South Africa, none of the organizations, community organizations and labor movements have been involved. And I think that it's important to say upfront that this is not a good start. That when we talk about consultation, we talk about meaningfully engaging the people who will be affected. The second thing I want to share with you that came up in the consultation is that when we conducted these workshops, participants were quite keen on putting what I would call their needs upfront. At the center of the discussions were mainly what this meant for them. And there were recurring themes, and I'll just mention a few that emerged in this workshop. The first one was the issue of water. As you all know, South Africa is a water-scarce country. And as we went through the discussions, the participants were quite keen on how the process of electrolysis was going to happen and be dependent on water, when in many of the sites and the hubs, the issue of drought and water scarcity was a daily occurrence. When we had workshops with trade unionists in one of the hubs, in one of the harbors of South Africa, the issue of workplace safety, the questions of what the plans were to upskill, reskill the workers who will be involved in the green hydrogen sector was a recurring theme. The third issue that emerged in the workshops was the question of jobs. And the point of reference for many of the participants was the renewable energy program, where people were aware that despite the hype about the jobs to be created, the jobs in the program were of a temporary nature and were in the construction phase, and that many of the projects were driven by multinational corporations, and that the technologies were imported without a significant impacts on industrialization in South Africa. So through our discussions and through these workshops, which I would say were more about educating ourselves about the green hydrogen economy than what I would call widespread consultation, the question of people's needs and how the development of green hydrogen would speak to those needs was at the center. And the message that I want to leave, Lauren, with this panel and the participants, that whilst it is important to look at questions of trade, how that trade will be fair and sustainable, if the needs of people, if their concerns about water, about jobs are not taken care of, what we think is important for decarbonization will be viewed by many people as not different to previous cycles of energy transitions, where the global south was seen as sites for extraction by the global north. And I think that all of us who are involved in some of these discussions must center the question of people's needs in a way that will mitigate the perceptions that are quite widespread about what these developments are all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dinga. Very interesting. The national process in South Africa echoes a lot from what we heard from all the other countries too. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Delia Villagraza, and I'm the Senior Advisor and Coordinator for this project with Brot für die Welt and Heinrich Böll Foundation. I will take you briefly through some of the key outcomes of the project. I will present first the opportunities and risks of green hydrogen, particularly for Global South countries, and then go through the recommendations that can ensure environmental and social benefits, as well as measures that incentivize green hydrogen over other types of hydrogen. There should be the slide presentation now. I'm not quite sure where it is. If we could go to the next slide, and probably I can actually not see it from my own screen very well, I'm afraid. I cannot see on which slide we are. I'm sorry.
It's the agenda slide.
Okay, next slide. And probably next slide. Sorry, I'll just open it on mine, because it's impossible for me to see where we are. I'm so sorry.
It's now the process slide.
Yeah, I need the slides which has the main opportunities at the top, please. So if you can see that, then we're at the right place. It's good?
Yes.
Excellent. So basically, I would like to, first of all, go through the opportunities which we have from green hydrogen production and trade, and quite a few of those. Green hydrogen can contribute to achieving climate targets if it's used only for sectors that are hard to electrify. It can accelerate clean energy investment and renewable energy and hydrogen access in exporting countries, while diversifying energy production away from fossils. It can also reduce air pollution and correspondingly lead to better health and improved biodiversity through avoiding fossil fuel production and pollution. It can create new jobs through new production facilities and transfer of skills and technology know-how, creating economic opportunities in exporting countries and earn foreign revenues from exports. Next slide, please. However, there are also concerns and risks, and some of those you have already heard from Dinga. And for instance, if hydrogen production is prioritized for export over the longer term, that represents a missed opportunity, as renewable energy capacity and hydrogen can then not benefit domestic energy supply. If it's done wrong, there could be land use conflicts or even expropriations for large-scale renewable installations and human rights violations. And we all know there can be no climate justice without human rights. Particularly in arid regions, there could be conflicts over water use for renewable energy and electrolysis, and fragile ecosystems could be damaged on badly chosen sites. Jobs could bypass locals if no skills programs exist or external workers are privileged. And last but not least, there are power balance questions, particularly for countries with bad governance, that could lead to profits for the few to the detriment of the many. And the many will very often be in the Global South. Next slide, please. So, what can be done to ensure the benefits and avoid the concerns? The national consultations and workshops have provided a very solid list of common sense key recommendations that I'd now like to come to. the key recommendation from the consultations is actually a point which is national for exporting nations mainly. Green hydrogen production and trade need to be embedded in a country's overall development, energy, and trade strategy. For hydrogen production and trade to be useful to all, embedded in an overall inclusive energy transition process, using a systemic approach. And that includes compatibility with the goals of the UN's Sustainable Development Agenda and the country's NDC. Exporters should then, based on their overall energy transition plan, create hydrogen roadmaps and national and regional strategies to provide a long-term vision for green hydrogen. And such strategies obviously need to be based on very strong social and sustainability standards. Next slide, please. Green hydrogen can do more for producer countries than just revenue creation. If green hydrogen policies are shaped in such a way that producer countries do not just remain exporters of raw hydrogen, but indeed benefit from value creation along the full value chain of production and trade, that's the way we would like it to go. Exporting countries should therefore consider how to leverage external demand and the corresponding revenue to bootstrap renewable energy and hydrogen production for domestic purposes too. And consumer countries, importers, for their part, must consider what trade and investment arrangements would support this principle, and that's really also in their own interest. Next slide, please. There are specific ways to ensure environmental benefits. First of all, we need monitoring and control mechanisms to prevent leakage from hydrogen pipelines, and the carbon footprint of hydrogen and its derivatives must be certified throughout its entire value chain. We must minimize water use, ensure water supply for local populations is not endangered, and carry out potential desalination cleanly, creating additional water for local communities instead of taking it away. Careful spatial planning for installations is key. Solid impact assessments is important, having those is important, and biodiversity-rich areas must be avoided as sites for green hydrogen facilities. Resource use needs to be minimized and recycling, in particular of rare materials, promoted. Next slide, please. To ensure social benefits, citizen participation is key. Make sure the energy debate is democratized and local populations get involved to ensure a fair, transparent, and sustainable energy transition overall. And concretely, promote community involvement from the very design phase of the projects, including ensuring that land-using communities have legal support to negotiate with energy companies and access to independent mediation in case of conflict. The principle of free, prior, and informed consent needs to be respected for all affected populations. Inclusion increases acceptance, a fact that project developers tend to forget at their peril. A particular issue is the avoidance of expropriations or removal of local communities. Rather, promote a synergetic use of land to avoid land use conflicts. For instance, for solar, you can do agrovoltaics. So in parallel, you have energy production and uses for agriculture on the same land. Ensure that hydrogen projects contribute to energy access and overcoming energy poverty by making parts of the additional renewable energy and hydrogen generation available to the local population. Organize skills training for local communities so that they can obtain the new jobs created. And these jobs need to be fairly paid and safe. Importing countries should require that their procurement and certification frameworks for green hydrogen include international human rights, social and environmental standards. Next slide, please. A very important point is we need to ensure that what we produce and trade is actually green hydrogen and not other color hydrogen, so not nuclear and not fossil fuel hydrogen. Incentive policies to generate initial scale-up for green hydrogen and to close the price gap to fossil hydrogen are very important. So you can, for instance, remove fossil fuel subsidies, which many countries unfortunately still have, install carbon prices, promote public procurement, and install quotas and obligations for green hydrogen. You can ban fossil alternatives, market access restrictions, or phase out obligations for non-green hydrogens are some of the options. And international cooperation and standardization can ensure a larger market for green hydrogen too. And that would include monitoring, certification, tracking, and accounting with internationally agreed criteria. And also needed is a harmonized definition of green hydrogen, so that green indeed means 100% renewables. Appropriate governance is crucial to achieve sustainable green hydrogen production and trade. My colleague Jörg will now take over the presentation and speak about governance. Jörg Haas is the lead for international politics at the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Thank you, and next slide, please.
Yes, next slide, please. So we have looked at the ways how, international governance could implement these recommendations and criteria. And essentially, we have come up with three, approaches: bilateral approaches, plurilateral, and multilateral approaches. Next slide. The bilateral policies are already, to some extent, pursued energy partnerships, and this should include long-term contractual arrangements between suppliers and buyer countries. And these should include all these standards and criteria. The advantage is really that it's very quick. You can negotiate relatively easily between two organizations, and you could potentially agree on relatively high standards because it's just two parties. The drawback could be that on the standard side, it's a proliferation and standard, and it could lead to market fragmentation. Next slide. A plurilateral approach could be obviously the EU for its internal market, but more importantly, I would say something like a group of like-minded countries that would internationally cooperate between producer countries and those who would be importing, something like a green hydrogen club, which would apply some high standards. So also that would be, easier than a full multilateral approach. That would be the positive side, but it could also take a bit longer with more parties involved. Next slide. Still, we think a sustainable hydrogen club could be comprised of like-minded countries which have a social responsibility embedded in their governments. Not all governments, I would say, have consideration of human rights and social factors really very strongly on their agenda. But we think there are enough countries, both on the producer and on the importer side. So that would be the group that would create such a sustainable hydrogen club. They would have a joint agreement, a common market potentially also, and beyond that common market, there should also be joint procurement mechanisms for green and sustainable hydrogen in that club. So that would be an idea which I think would be very worthwhile to pursue. Next slide. Last but not least, we looked into multilateral policy approaches. So such a club could enlarge over time. What could certainly also look into existing initiatives and equip it with more resources. And finally, existing international organizations could establish the standards of a future green hydrogen market. Organizations like IRENA and IEA are already active in that field, but I see not yet enough momentum behind the kind of strong sustainability standards that we think are necessary. Yes, next slide. Yes, I'm handing over to Lauren Hermanus, who will now moderate the discussion with our panelists.
Great, thank you very much, Jörg and Delia, for those inputs. I would now like to introduce three speakers who will make contributions shortly. Firstly, I would like to introduce Rainer Barke, who is a climate and energy expert with many years of experience in public administration as State Secretary for Energy in the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs, State Secretary in the Federal Ministry of the Environment, and other roles. He is also the Special Envoy of the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action for German-Namibian Climate and Energy Cooperation. Heine was the founding director of Agora Energiewende and Federal Managing Director of Deutsche Umwelthilfe. Then, following Heine, we will have James Newper, who is the Presidential Economic Advisor and Green Hydrogen Commissioner for the Government of Namibia. He is a multidisciplinary financial professional with a background in accounting, asset management, and wealth management. A graduate of UNAM and Rhodes University, James has worked in various industry and national bodies and also served as the founding chair of the Namibia Savings and Investment Association. And then we will have Alexander Tomczak, who is a member of the cabinet of the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, in charge of the European Green Deal. Alexandra is responsible for the just transition in European coal and carbon-intensive regions as part of the Green Deal cabinet. Before joining the cabinet of Frans Timmermans, Alexandra has been leading the establishment of the European Commission platform for coal regions in transition and has been responsible for the European Commission policy on coal. Now, I would like to hand over to Heine Barke to please make your presentation. And you are muted.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. And congratulations to the study. All the recommendations I can agree with. You have looked at altogether 7 countries in this study. Unfortunately, you did not include Namibia because then you would have had a positive example that shows that even though there are a lot of critical points that we have to look at, it is also possible to do things the right way. Dinga was just talking about the situation in South Africa. As far as I know, the plans, they also include export of green hydrogen derivatives to Europe in a country where during this year, 25% of the hours, there was no electricity for the people of South Africa. I think it is a little bit ridiculous to use the electricity from wind and solar to produce hydrogen derivatives for the European market. But there are countries, as I just said, that have a completely different situation, and so is Namibia. And as you just mentioned, I'm the special envoy from the German side for this partnership that we have with Namibia. After me, James Manupe will talk, the Hydrogen Commissioner of Namibia. And when I talk about this project, first of all, I always point out it was an initiative from Namibia. It was the Namibian government that saw the opportunity, saw that they have great solar and wind capacities, that they have a lot of space, and that there's Europe and other parts of the world that need the green molecules for their pathway to decarbonization. So they did a bidding process. James probably will later talk about that, and they chose among many companies one that is a joint venture between the South African Nicholas Holding and the German company Enertrag. But this is per chance. They could have also chosen somebody else. So what I want to point out is the initiative was a Namibian initiative. It did not come from the German government or any German company. Now, what they're trying to do there in the southern part of Namibia is indeed actually meeting all the criteria that you mentioned in your study. You cannot, in a country that is as dry as Namibia, take fresh water. The water has to be desalinated, It's going to be water from the ocean. And it's not going to take away any water from people. It's going to also give an opportunity to supply the small town of Lüderitz with water from this desalination plant. Second of all, land. There is not any conflict over land. Well, if you don't look at the mining industry, because this is the former Sperrgebiet. It's an area that is completely sectioned off. There has been mining activity in the past. There are no pastures, there are no people who live there. Nobody is expelled, with the exception of the mining industry. The Namibian government now has the challenge to withdraw some of the mining licenses that they have given there. Then this project is going to create a lot of jobs in Namibia. And the joint target is that at least 90% of the jobs are going to be going to Namibian people, and not only the blue-collar jobs, but also the white-collar jobs. And which is, I think, extremely important, this hydrogen plant is going to produce so much electricity that is not completely used for the hydrogen plant. It can be used to make Namibia the first country in Africa with 100% renewable energy. And a country that right now is importing electricity from coal generators from South Africa, in the future cannot only refrain from importing coal electricity, but also export renewable electricity into the South African power pool. So I think these are very important points, and I share the concerns that many people in the environment community and the third world movement have about the hydrogen projects, but we can do a better job. And Namibia shows how we can avoid the mistakes and do things right.
James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lauren, and thanks everyone for having us. Greetings from COP27 in Egypt. Hopefully some of you have seen me speak before. This is my new office, so bear with me. It's not necessarily as well curated as our traditional offices, but nonetheless, it's a real pleasure to be dialing in from COP27. I found the report to be really supportive of what it is that we're doing. And so, of course, there was a really good amount of comfort and reinforcement to sort of at least tell us that we're certainly moving in the right direction. You know, I mean, Rainer has said everything about Namibia, so I'm not sure what else I will say. But what I can say is that something in the report that perhaps can be expanded on a little bit more is actually the green hydrogen opportunity will create avenues of trade regionally, not just internationally, right? So as we're looking to create these projects, we will be likely unlocking opportunities to generate electricity that we can use for local consumption, but of course that we could also sell into the SAPP. So Rainer did mention that Namibia currently imports about 60 to 70% of its electricity from the SAPP. And of course, the whole region is fairly energy insecure. So imagine a situation whereby Namibia not only gets to be energy self-sufficient, you know, looking to have a 100% green grid, but at the same time actually begins to pour green electrons into the regional grid. That does a couple of things. A, it could increase the region's competitiveness from a manufacturing perspective, but at the same time, it allows Namibia to start industrializing at a scale and at a pace it couldn't have done itself before, because obviously the cost of the electricity that we'd be looking to generate from the CHP is anywhere between 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour, whereas the cost that we're of electricity that we're actually importing from the region at the moment is anywhere between 9 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. And so that begins to attract things like smelters, iron ore facilities in Namibia, which would be looking to make hot briquetted iron. And so the green hydrogen opportunity also ushers in a potential green manufacturing industry, which of course is quite an important element of our ambition to reach essentially an industrialization state by Vision 2030, which is part of our national development plans as well. I do think one of the things, I was just reading this report, that it really reminded me to try and do more is to collaborate amongst producers, right? So there's a lot of talk about how we can produce the molecules for example, Europe. But if you're in Namibia, and I just came from visiting the Mauritanians and their pavilion, and we're thinking of an exchange between Mauritania and Namibia, a lot of the content from this report and what we're doing in Namibia, we can share with other countries as well. And so whether that is South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, or even a country like Mauritania, to ensure that the standards that we come together and put together as producers are fairly aligned, right? Because the consumers, for example, Europe has a delegated act, but do the producers actually have a piece of legislation that kind of sets the standard on what, for example, are the key elements of making sustainable green hydrogen? And so, you know, that's one of the things I would like to thank the foundation for putting this particular report together, is it does actually remind us to start thinking about interregional trade. And certainly, of course, apologies, the internet here at COP27 is a bit unstable. Sorry, the internet at COP27 is a bit unstable, but that's the reality of dialing in from from a place different from home. But I think you got the gist of my delivery. So again, don't just focus on exporting the molecules to producers, but make sure that interregionally you're using the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to ensure that you're trading more than just physical goods, and that you can be trading molecules, you can be trading electrons, and of course, increasing regional security while you're at it as well. I'll stop there for now. Lauren, as I said, I think Rainer has said quite a little bit about Namibia, so I won't go into too much there. Maybe one last thing I will say, especially between Namibia and South Africa. South Africa is one of the larger carbon emitters in the world. I think it's number 13 on the planet, but certainly Africa's largest, right? It produces, I think, about 40% of the continent's emissions. And so Namibia, having a very small population, a very small carbon footprint, is looking to strategically place itself as an enabler and a conduit through which we can actually decarbonize our neighbor. Of course, Namibia suffers quite a bit from climate change. Droughts particularly hit us very, very badly because our largest energy generator is actually a hydroelectric power station, and the agricultural sector employs half of our working population. So when we get hit by a drought, the country really suffers quite a bit. And so it's upon ourselves, or at least it's an initiative that we would like to take full on to try and contribute to combating climate change. And we think we can do that not just by decarbonizing ourselves, but by working with a country like South Africa, building common user infrastructure that could go from Namibia into South Africa, like pipelines that could transport the molecules and the hydrogen. And we think that is a particular interest that we should all look at between Namibia, South Africa, and developed nations that are contributing to the JET-P transition. Because the way to decarbonize South Africa isn't always just from within South Africa, but just as the Netherlands can provide appropriately priced molecules to Germany, we do suspect that Namibia can play a meaningful role to help South Africa reduce its carbon emissions as well. Let me leave it there for now, Lauren. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you what we're doing in Namibia. Thanks.
James, thank you so much, and for that warm offer of international collaboration. I'll convey the message to my comrades at home. So now I would like to hand over to Alexandra. Please go ahead.
Hi, hello everyone, and greetings from Brussels. Part of the European Commission and the Cabinet of the Executive Vice President are in Sharm-el-Sheikh. Maybe you will bumped into them, but some of us have stayed in Brussels to continue working on important priorities that we have here at home, including the additional priority of becoming independent from Russian fossil fuels as fast as possible, which is something that keeps us very busy. Thanks for this report. When I was listening to the presentation, it struck me that we have been focusing a lot on just transition in the context of phasing out things, but seems that it's also very important to focus on just transition when we're phasing in new technologies. So that is an important conclusion that I would take away from this report. Because what we have always noticed and underlined when it comes to hydrogen is that it is an opportunity for countries that perhaps have lost out on the previous industrial revolutions to make benefits and to grow on the basis of the new industrial revolution, which is the clean tech industrial revolution, and hydrogen is at the center of that. But it's not, of course, the only component of the clean tech and the new industrial revolution. The new industrial revolution, we see it very much benefiting countries that can produce renewable and clean power. And here, countries like Namibia are obviously presenting a lot of advantages and can greatly benefit from that new industrial revolution. The past has favored countries that had a lot of fossil fuel resources, so we really see this as an opportunity to have a more democratic new industrial revolution, a better, a more fair industrial revolution. But you still need to have access to new technologies. Even if you have the wind and sun, you still have to have access to new technologies. You have to have access to affordable financing. I think this is something that many leaders have underlined in the first week of the COP, that not even if you have good wind and sun resources, you don't necessarily have access to finance in the same conditions like many, for example, Western European countries or European countries have. So maybe on the top of the recommendations that you made and making this phasing in of new technologies fair and just and benefiting local communities, I would also add to the list of recommendations of looking at the broader clean tech cooperation, not to see this only as, okay, what can we export to other parts of the world, but how can we all give and take in this transition to clean tech. Some of us have the know-how, the technologies, others have the raw materials, others have excellent renewable energy resources. It would be great, I think, if we could at some point map all of these assets that we need for becoming climate neutral as a world economy, and to see what this will mean for future trade and economic exchanges. But I wanted to say also that I very much agree with the need to focus on local needs, on industrialization, and specifically when it comes to the African context, electrification. 600 million people still have no access to electricity. It seems inconceivable to focus on investing in renewable power without thinking in parallel about how to try to build on these new investments, to also try to accelerate our work on alleviating energy poverty. And here I wanted to share an experience also from our work as the European Commission. We have been reaching out to a number of partners to talk about cooperation of hydrogen. Very often our partners are approaching it from a purely export perspective, and we are keen to put more of a, let's say, local content and local use on the agenda. So it is, I think very much, has to come from both sides. And here I also wanted to second excellent and applaud excellent cooperation that we are starting with Namibia right now. Our president launched a closer partnership with Namibia on green hydrogen and on raw materials last week when she visited COP. So we are looking forward to following up on this and implementing that new partnership. So as the European Union, we are looking at also regional cooperation to supplement and to complement what we are doing at bilateral level. We are looking at cooperation focused in the Mediterranean area, encompassing Africa, Middle East, and Europe. The European Union held an event yesterday with the Executive Vice President Timmermans. This was the first discussion was held. We will be following up on that event in the months to come and ahead of COP28 to see how we can operationalize this Mediterranean hydrogen investment plan. And so I hope to be able to stay in touch with the stakeholders who are part of this conversation and continue building on these really good and valuable recommendations that you have put forward. So thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And thank you to all of our three panelists. We now have a tight 10 minutes for some Q&A, and I see that there are one or two questions coming in. However, I'd like to kick off by putting to all three panelists the following question, which is that clearly there is an opportunity associated with various kinds of collaboration in this space, and indeed also with the club approach that Jörg has particularly enunciated for us this afternoon. And I was wondering if, building on your comments thus far, you might have some additional reflections on the opportunities and perhaps also some of the risks that are associated with this kind of collective effort across different countries at the international level. So I think, James, I think I will start with you, since this was something that came through very clearly in your presentation, then over to Heine and over to Alexandra.
Sure, thanks, Lauren. You can pick on me. So collaboration, I think, is a very key part of problem solving, right? A positive outcome, I think, of collaboration is that the solutions that are crafted could be shared, well understood, and well implemented, right? So, for example, if Namibia, for whatever reason, was doing something that was good and progressive, but was not sharing that with its peers, and its peers across the continent didn't do as well in embarking on this journey, typically what happens is a risk premium is attached to the whole continent or the whole region anyway, right? Emerging market risk, but of course, in this instance, it could very well be, products from Africa are not necessarily well manufactured. And that risk typically translates in a higher cost of capital, and typically that would affect all African projects. And so the notion of Ubuntu, I am because you are, in this instance for me, is very important, right? So collaborating with other African nations and other nations from the South to de-risk project development would benefit all of us. And it would also then entrench trade routes that have a reliable supply of hydrogen, and that would help with the reduction of the LCOH, levelized cost of hydrogen, or the levelized cost of ammonia, or any product that we make. One potential risk of too much collaboration is you might stifle creativity, right? If there's any one big strong player, whether it's Egypt, Morocco, or South Africa, and they're doing something a certain way and everyone just follows, it might deter, whether inherently or proactively, smaller nations from coming up with more innovative ways to problem solve for the establishment of an industry. So of course you have to embark on that journey consciously, right? To try and make sure that we're doing something that is sustainable, that is impactful, that encourages regional trade. It encourages a higher GDP per capita and wealth creation for the region. But I think one would have to be cognizant of those two particular risks as well. I think one small thing I would say that is important to collaborate on is certainly how to capture the wealth sustainably for our nations. I have certainly done, or at least in Namibia, we've done something to start a sovereign wealth fund. I think those sort of lessons we could share with everyone as well. Let me stop there for now. Thanks, Lauren.
Great. Thank you. Great. Heine, can I hand over to you?
You're on mute again, Rainer.
Thank you for reminding me again. We have a huge crisis in Europe right now because of Russia's attack on Ukraine, and because we made a terrible mistake in Europe and in my country, Germany in particular, by trading with a partner who was supplying us with cheap fossil fuels. Now, the question is, what do we learn from this crisis? My lesson is that we should choose our partners in the future carefully. And that means that we should look for countries like Namibia that have a democratic elected government, that respect the rule of law, that respect freedom of press, and some other important criteria. Because if we don't do that, we're going to just go from this one mistake to the next mistake. I see a lot of countries that I personally look upon as dictatorships that are now keen to get into the green hydrogen business. And if we only allow the market forces to work now, we're going to get in a very similar situation as we are just trying to free ourselves from Russia. So we as Europeans should make the global South an offer that is not open to everybody, that is open to democratic countries, and grant them a special access to our markets. Cooperations like Germany and Namibia has started now, and the European Union last week at the COP27, I was there as well, also did with the European Union as a whole. I think that should be a model. And what we can do is not only grant preferred access, but we can also, as European Union, define the criteria. I think, Jörg, as nice as your idea of a club is, I think it would be much better if Europe, as a community, a club of 27 members, would say very clearly what is our definition of green hydrogen and what other criteria have to be met in order to be able to export green hydrogen to Europe. That would be a very, very strong signal, and it would serve several purposes. So at that point, I'll leave it with this. I see that it's almost 4 o'clock, and Jörg, no, I'm sorry, Alexandra probably also wanted to say a few words.
Yes, I fear there's never enough time once we get going. But Alexandra, I'd like to give you an opportunity to please contribute as well.
Yeah, thanks, because it's an excellent question. I think there is this expectation that fossil fuel trade and fossil fuel economies were characterized by some dependencies and interdependencies, and once we move towards clean tech, it will all naturally resolve itself, and we will be in this great world where everyone cooperates. I think the reality is going to be a little bit more complex, and we need to take proactive measures to make sure that the future global hydrogen trade doesn't leave us in dependencies which have characterized the current situation and which have made us weak here in Europe. So working on setting up a much more liquid and a much more transparent and reliable global hydrogen market is something that we believe should be a priority, and we have prioritized that also for the EU. You probably know that from our recent strategies that we want to be a big producer, consumer, and importer of renewable hydrogen, and that's why we have a very strong interest in making this nascent hydrogen market a reliable market. We are currently working on the concept of a hydrogen bank, looking at how we can support both domestic and imported hydrogen, how we can create liquid markets. We're discussing with a number of partners, including an initiative which is being developed in Germany, H2 Global, on how to learn on the lessons from the fossil fuel markets and avoid replicating the mistakes, the sort of unsustainable point-to-point focused contracts, and focus more on a liquid market that benefits both the producers and the consumers. So it's a very compelling concept to be discussing at the global level on what this future hydrogen market should look like. But of course, that should not distract us from putting as much energy into actually building a pipeline of hydrogen projects, because as it always is, with these exciting new sectors and technologies, you should always make sure that you spend enough resources on actually getting the projects off the ground, and try not to conceptualize how the whole hydrogen market will work before you actually see the first molecules being produced. So very interesting concept. Let's do that, and let's try to get as many renewable hydrogen projects to get off the ground as soon as possible. That's what we are focusing on in the EU.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists for that diversity of rich and varied perspectives. Jörg, I will hand over to you to wrap up the session.
Yeah, I mean, I need to just thank everybody who participated in this discussion, and not just in the discussion. Obviously, I need also to thank all my colleagues and all the partners in the Global South who contributed to the report that we have been presenting. I think Delia shared it in the chat. I recommend everyone taking a look at these recommendations. And I look forward to collaborating with our partners, with also the panelists that were now here at this presentation, to develop a sustainable green hydrogen economy, because we must not fail this time when we develop a new trade relationship. It needs to be fair, it needs to be sustainable and respect human rights. Thank you so much.